Hello family! Our movie begins with a girl called Lee is working in an office in this state, and her hands are bound with a rope. Following that, we see a flashback scene from 6 months earlier, and here we see Lee being from a mental hospital. Lee was being released from the hospital, but she was not thrilled. Today is Lee's sister's wedding, so Lee's mother arrives to pick her up, and Lee's mother then goes to the ceremony with Lee. Lee is on a nervous breakdown at this wedding. Just thereafter, Lee's old buddy Peter appears and speaks with her for a while. Lee also expresses boredom with this wedding. Then Peter takes Lee's hand and they begin dancing. Lee's father is also there at this wedding. He drinks too much, so he is escorted inside the room. Actually, Lee's father is an alcoholic, which is why his relationship with his wife is strained, and as a result, Lee has a slew of family issues. Lee also feels awful because his family fights frequently. When she sees her father in this condition, she goes to her room and tries to hurt herself with a sharp object. But she decides not to. Lee, in fact, damages herself anytime she is upset. It fit to her as well because she slashed his vein, and as a result, Lee's mother committed her to a mental institution. And at the beginning of the film, Lee was being released from the same mental hospital, and now Lee wants to fix herself and start over. For this reason, she can also learn to type so that she may get a job. Lee once threw all of her sharp artifacts in the trash, but then she notices her mother, who keeps all of the dangerous stuff in the house in a cabin. Lee is devastated to learn that even her mother does not trust her. That's why she takes those pointy objects out of the trash again. Lee then notices a newspaper in the dustbin that contains an advertisement for the position of secretary. There was a job for a lawyer's secretary, and Lee goes to that office to interview for it. She notices that there are files scattered about the office, as well as the work she used to do previously in this office. She comes out crying in front of Lee. And then we see the boss of this firm, a lawyer named Gray, who is a pretty odd figure. Lee is immersed in his thoughts when he enters the office, does not refuse anything. Lee finds it unusual and to leave, but Gray stops her and has her begin the interview. During the interview, Gray asks Lee bizarre things. Gray then instructs Lee to make coffee. Her mother would have been overjoyed to learn that Lee got the job. Lee then starts coming to work and works hard, while Gray takes care of the flowers in his office. Just then, Lee arrives with donuts, and Gray informs Lee that he has discarded the important file, and instructs Lee to bring the file. Lee dumps those donuts in the trash when he leaves. Lee then goes downstairs and begins looking for that file in the trash can. Gray is staring out the window upstairs and is overjoyed to see Lee suffering like this. Lee then finds the and notices her mother, who was coming to pick up Lee, but Lee still had hours to finish the work. Lee's mother and father were having a quarrel, and she was waiting here to avoid her husband. Lee then takes the file to Gray. Gray then informs her that he must now file the file. It's not necessary. That was due to the fact that he already had a copy, and he's been making Lee worthless ever since because he enjoyed watching Lee suffer. When Lee bends over to position the mouse trap, Gray informs him that there are too many rats in the office and wants him to set up a mouse trap. Then Gray notices the wound on Lee's body. After a while, Gray's ex-wife arrives at the workplace. When Lee arrives to look for Gray, he hides inside his closet. Gray tells Lee from the closet to inform his ex-wife that he is not present. When Gray's ex-wife learns of this, she urges Lee to stay here till he arrives, but she will wait for him. Lee then receives a phone call from her father, which is quite sad. While on the phone, the wife of the devoted Gray begins touching the items kept in the office and notices Lee putting her father on hold. Gray asks her wife to go from their hearing. Gray's wife becomes enraged and exits. Even after she has departed, she returns her father's call, but he has left the call. When all of this occurs, Lee becomes very tense, and she tries to damage herself again in rage. Then Lee pulls sharp items from her purse and is about to cut herself when Gray notices her. Lee does not cut her and returns the sharp objects. Lee invites Peter for that night, and Peter then proposes marriage to Lee. Accepting this proposal, Gray was also present and has been secretly monitoring everything. Gray acts suspiciously with Lee the next day when he arrives at the office. Lee types a letter that contains numerous errors, which Gray notices. He tells her a lot of things and asks her to retype the letter. Lee returns to Gray after typing the letter, and Gray tells Lee that he dislikes Lee's dressing sense and makeup. The following day, Peter invites Lee to meet his mother and father. Peter's parents are very fond of Lee, and Peter's mother informs Lee that Pete's sister is getting married next month, and Peter's mother wishes for them to marry on the same day. Lee pauses as she hears about the wedding because she has the impression that things are moving quickly. The next day, Lee arrives at the office and instructs Gray on how to approach her customer. After they both sit on the sofa. Gray asks Lee about Peter yet again, Gray asks Lee if she loves Peter and wants to marry him. Lee is embarrassed by the question and tells Gray that she is unsure about her and Peter's marriage. Gray then tells Lee that he knows she cut herself. Gray then asks Lee to vow that she will not cut herself or injure herself. Gray then tells Lee, "Today you will go home alone. Make me feel better." Following their chat, the two's understanding begins to improve. Lee then tells her mother to go home and begins strolling down the road alone. She feels fantastic when she walks alone, and she begins extremely confident. Gray used to keep a photo of his ex-wife near the flowers in his office, but now he keeps a photo of Lee there a few days later. Lee makes another printing error, which enraged Gray, who summons Lee to his office and begins slapping Lee's back. During this punishment, Lee begins to like it, and she adores doing like this. After this occurrence, Lee becomes drawn to Gray, and as a result, Lee tosses all of the sharp objects used to hurt herself into the sea. Lee now has complete control over what Lee does and what and how much he eats. It was also decided by Gray itself. As the days pass, the punishment process continues in this manner. Lee asks Gray if she can spend the night with him one day. Upon hearing this, Gray realizes that Lee has fallen in love with him and refuses to stop her. Following this, the distance from Gray, Lee begins to be maintained once more. Lee's father's condition worsens, necessitating her hospitalization. Lee is now completely broken. She goes to meet Gray at his residence. Even here, Gray does not speak anything properly, and Lee then leaves. Now, Lee creates mistakes on purpose to gain Gray's attention, but he also ignores these blunders. For example, Lee once put an earthworm in a letter and gave it to Gray. When Gray sees the letter, he decides to punish Lee and brings her to his office, telling her to kneel down. Lee believes Gray would be intimate with her this time, but Gray masturbates and wants her to go. Gray gradually realizes that whatever he is doing with Lee is wrong. He burns all of his memories of Lee as a result. He also fires Lee from her job. Lee is furious and slaps and tells him she likes him, but Gray does not listen to her and fires her. She tries to work in a variety of places after being fired from her job, but she misses standing outside Gray's office. Gray had frequently changed the locks in his office so that Lee could not enter. Days later, Peter grabs the ring and goes to Lee. Lee also agrees to marry this time. Now that the moment has come, Peter's mother is preparing Lee for marriage while herself getting ready. She realizes she just loves Gray. After realizing it, she puts the given ring of Peter on the table and runs to Gray, and Lee tells her she is feeling too Gray. Gray warns her that neither of those people can live like this for the remainder of their lives, but at Lee's insist, Gray takes the test. He instructs Lee to place it on the desk and instructs her not to move her hand until he instructs her. Gray departs from there, while Lee remains in the same situation for a long period, and Peter appears, looking for her. Lee tells him she doesn't want to be with him and keeps her hand on the desk as Gray stands outside, doing nothing. He telephones from the landline, but Lee again receives the phone by mouth without lifting his hand. Gray will follow suit after this. Then Lee's parents and many friends arrive and try to persuade her, but Lee does not listen to them and does not eat anything. Lee spends approximately 2 days in this situation. News of Lee's action travels throughout the entire media. Finally, Gray appears to meet Lee, pulls her up in his lap and takes her home, where the two become intimate. Following that, both of them begin to live happily ever after, and the movie concludes in this manner. Leave us a comment on how you found the movie. See you in the next video. We hope that you enjoy your time and have a good day.